Hello, and welcome to the ThinkJSOU webinar series, brought to you by the Office for Strategic Engagement. Today, we are pleased to present a distinguished speaker. This session is unclassified and will be recorded and posted to the JSOU network. Please keep in mind that the views and opinions expressed by all participants do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policy of the U.S. government, Department of Defense, or USSOCOM. If you have questions after this session, please email thinkjsou@jsou.edu.
Hello and welcome to ThinkJSOU. Today we are very fortunate to be interviewing Dr. Christian Vianna de Azevedo, a senior special agent for the Brazilian Federal Police, who is currently serving as the Undersecretary of Justice and Public Security for Intelligence and Integration within the Department of Justice and Public Security in the State of Minas Gerais. In addition to his impressive practitioner experience, Christian is an accomplished academic who holds a PhD in international relations and has written significantly on issues involving terrorism and crime and the nexus between them. Hey, Christian, welcome to ThinkJSOU.
Thank you, Dave. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for this opportunity of being here and talking to you.
Well, thank you, Christian. You know, today I wanted to discuss a couple different issues considering your rich scholar and practitioner background. You've done some research on Hezbollah in the tri-border area between Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. And I was hoping you could give the audience an appreciation of Hezbollah's activity in the region and the purpose of their activity in the region. And then on the second topic, you know, you have both a foot in the practitioner field and the academic field. Why don't you discuss how your academic pursuits helped you, made you a better practitioner and affected the way you approach being a practitioner?
Right, Dave. Yes. Now, these are two topics that I'm very fond of. Both the one that deals with countering terrorism, crime, terror nexus in South America, and also this one about this merge of the practitioners world with the academia world. And yes, for the first topic, Hezbollah in the tri-border area and Hezbollah's influence around South America. That was my object of my studies during my PhD. My PhD thesis is actually about crime terror nexus, and I discuss two different groups that I deemed to be the terrorist groups, which is Lebanese Hezbollah's activities in South America, and also Colombian FARC. And ex-FARC dissidents that are still very active, not only in Colombia, but in the vicinity, in the countries around. And as for Hezbollah in the tri-border area, well, they have been there for a long, long time, since late 80s, when the waves of migrants from Lebanon, they came to Brazil, to Argentina, Paraguay, Venezuela, and Colombia, fleeing the ongoing civil war in Lebanon that lasted from 1975 to basically 1990. And more than 1 million of them came to Brazil at that time. And nearly 500,000 came to other parts of South America. And Hezbollah was a group that was founded in 1982, right on the heat of the civil war. And some of their leadership, they have envisioned that would be a good idea to send them embedded within this diaspora towards South America, given that those Shia communities, they were establishing themselves in tri-border area in large communities, and also in Venezuela and Colombia and other spots around South America. So Hezbollah has, sent some of their operatives alongside with those migrants to establish their beachheads within the country. And then tri-border area was the ideal spot for them, because it's this area that borders Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. And it's known for being a lawless in this area there is even a nickname for that area, the United Nations of Crime, because there's so much crime going on there. And why? Because it's a border area there are two major towns and one smaller one. The Foz do Iguaçu in Brazil, Ciudad del Este in Paraguay, and Puerto Iguaçu in Argentina. And Foz do Iguaçu is the largest city, followed by Ciudad del Este and Puerto Iguaçu. there are probably more than 1 million people that live, in the area within those 3 cities. And it's not only a conurbation, the cities, they connect each other, but also there are large areas of tropical forest cut by 2 major rivers, River Paraná and River Iguaçu, and a very large lake. And so it's an area that combines urban and nature and wild environment together. And once it's a border, and it has become a free trade zone in the 70s in Paraguay. And free trade zones generally attract all sorts of businesses, legal and illegal. So criminal organizations established their foothold there for decades. And then it was a thriving area for all sorts of crime, contraband, and then terrorist organizations have benefited from this. Not only Hezbollah, we have there are authors that claim that even Al-Qaeda leadership has been there in the 90s. Islamic State operatives or supporters, they were based there for a while, and among other types of criminal organizations like European mafias, Mexican cartels, Chinese mafia, and the like. So Hezbollah is just one of them. But in there, Hezbollah has a firm foot. They have been operating all sorts of crimes in there since terror facilitation for the attacks that had happened in the Argentina in the beginning of the 90s, 1992 and 94, and also other types of facilitation to enable their operations in Lebanon and beyond. So this is something brief about tri-border area. If you want me to develop, in any sense within this.
One of the questions I had in trying to get my mind wrapped around this, are they infiltrating the communities? And what I mean by that, are they utilizing that as an opportunity to recruit individual citizens of that tri-border region into their organization? Or is it looked upon as just a way, an extension outside of their territory, as a way to generate profit, to enable operations, or to use military speak to increase, operational reach? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. Actually, I believe that they operate in both senses. They needed this base of operations in that area in order to facilitate terrorism attacks elsewhere, because they haven't attacked any infrastructure or any country in South America since 1994. And at the same time, they use their influence within the community, the Shia diaspora, to recruit among its members. And then in order to understand this context, I think we should go back in time. By the time that was the end of the Cold War in late 80s, beginning of the 90s, in which, all the literature, they used to say that terrorist groups were basically state-sponsored, and then they are proxy groups and everything, the two blocks, the socialist and the capitalist bloc. And right after the end of the Cold War, some of these groups, they have lost their sponsors. So they had to find another way to finance themselves. And since most of these groups, or nearly all of them, were crime related, because they had to purchase weapons, they have to purchase bombs, they have to find organizations that could offer them fake passports and documents so they could move through countries. So they were already in touch with criminals. So to do this jump in order to become criminals themselves or fund through criminal activities, it was a matter of a few years, and they became professional and expert in doing so. But a group like Hezbollah, that is probably one of the only ones that still have a state sponsor, which is Iran. And Hezbollah does not hide that. In the leadership's speeches in Lebanon, they do say that Iran is responsible for most, if not all, of its funding. Well, I see it in that way. They still depend on Iran for a large amount of its funding, but they are more and more reliant on criminal funding for their terrorist purposes. Because once they have established their criminal networks, for instance, drug trafficking, money laundering, arms trafficking, and they have a regular inflow of money that comes from this activity, they become more independent regarding Iran. And even in cases that in the late 90s, there was a shortage of money coming from Iran to them. So they had to reevaluate and redefine their funding strategy, because they realized that, well, even though we have this, Iran is committed to us, we do not know if how much funding, if the stream of funding will be stable or stabilized through years or decades. So they decided, in order to guarantee that they would have their funding for their activities, being terrorist activities or the activities that they have also, because they also have territory in southern Lebanon and southern Beirut in the Bekaa Valley, in which they provide the population, the Shia population, public services like schools, like clinics, health clinics, like well, people's basic needs that the Lebanese state is not able to provide them. It's like any other territorial organization that provide people's goods in order to have their legitimacy on their territory. And that's not only terrorist groups that do that. We see criminal organizations like in Brazil that they do that in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, in which they provide people the services that the state is not able to provide. So it's not something typical of Hezbollah. But once Hezbollah needs a large funding in order to keep these provisions, since they are an organization that in Lebanon, they hold territory. And they have their militia, their armed wing deployed in Syria, for instance, fighting a war there for many years, deployed elsewhere in the Middle East. So they need also funding for those activities. And so South America, in my view, is a place that they use for funding and also for facilitating. And therefore, as we put our lenses on the tri-border area, that area for them is like a gold mine, in where they can not only recruit people to their criminal endeavors, but also foster an environment, being in an environment that is it's like a region in which the state has not the upper hand always, because it's a bordering area, and generally international borders, especially those that combine free trade zones, conurbation of cities, and also a wild environment around. They are a good nest for criminal activities to thrive, because the state controls are weak, as we see in the tri-border area. For the three states that border there, they have weak controls of what happens on the ground. So Hezbollah takes advantage of that to develop their operations. So they do profit from this embedding within the local Shia community, and also the base area for funding and facilitation. And in the wake of the attacks in 1994 in Argentina, and the investigation that followed, it was proven that how tri-border area was critical for the attacks logistics.
Now, you mentioned with the Hezbollah being an Iranian proxy. Do you see, with Hezbollah's current activity going on, do you see that being exploited by Iran, or just the potential for exploitation? I've seen other, writers talk about Iranian influence, and what I'm always trying to appreciate, are they just saying because Hezbollah is there, therefore Iran has influence, or are they actually arguing, or do you believe, I should say, that it's something that Iran is currently exploiting or has a plan to exploit, not just a potential exploitation?
Right, Dave. Yes, you're right. I see it in both ways. Yeah, it's an Iranian proxy for sure. I believe it's an Iranian proxy, But the thing that I see at most is that it depends. Iran is very aware of its proxy Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is scattered all over the world, and Iran is very it accompanies Hezbollah's activities up very close. And what happens is, as Iran sees the need to exploit Hezbollah, it does exploit Hezbollah. For instance, what happens in Venezuela, that Iran has a foothold in Venezuela for many years. And it was about 18, 19 years ago when Ahmadinejad was Iranian's president and Hugo Chavez was Venezuela's president. And when they came together and they established a kind of even a friendship and a closer relationship, Hezbollah was already present in Venezuela. And Hezbollah was like liaised for Iran there. Hezbollah's presence there enabled Iran to grease, to oil their relationship with the Venezuelan government. The Hezbollah helped Iran in this case to bring them closer, because they knew how the Venezuelan political establishment worked. They knew how Hugo Chavez and their associates, they did business and everything. So they were able to help Iran in order to come and have this more and more of an influence in Venezuela and invest in Venezuela in an array of businesses. So from that time onwards, they have been close partners, Iran and Venezuela. So on other ways that I see that, it was in this 1994 bombings in Argentina. There was also something that was in the interest of both Hezbollah and Iran that happened. So Iran used Hezbollah as its operational arm in order to conduct this kind of bombings. And in a way, Dave, it's the same way that I see in our current time, because as we see, for instance, Iran has been sanctioned for many years by the US and for a long time by also the European Union because of the nuclear program and all. So coming to continents like South America, they find a way to circumvent those sanctions, because they deal a lot in the black market, buying all sorts of goods that are shipped to Iran through Venezuela, for instance. They keep a leverage here with the governments that are more leaning towards towards Iran. They're more friendly to Iran, like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, once Bolivia and Ecuador in the past. So they know that these governments also, they have this anti-US sentiment, and they capitalize on that, coming closer and I wouldn't say infiltrating might be a strong word for some countries, but they do a way of coming closer and become friends and making businesses. And then when they see the opportunity, they do infiltrate when they see it's an important opportunity. Because as we see, for instance, if let's think about any type of war, hypothetically broke out between the U.S. military and Iran, for instance, they wouldn't face the U.S. military face to face as a regular army to army kind of stuff, because they would not have the strength to win. They would lose this war, but they could fight in a more asymmetric way. Once they have their base in tribal area in Venezuela, in Colombia, they could harm U.S. infrastructure or interests or enterprises in these countries, because they could conduct terrorist attacks against U.S. embassies, for instance, or U.S. companies in these countries, because it's like the underbelly that they can't be protected by the U.S. elsewhere. So they have this, they leverage with these countries, so they can have, they can potentially be used to advance Iran's interests outside of the Middle East. And that's not only South America. In my view, they are able to do this also in Africa, in Europe, in other places.
So it sounds to me that while, this might not have originally been some, well thought out strategy by Iran, where this was an initial phase of, sending Hezbollah to the tri-border region, setting these conditions to exploit later as the underbelly, towards the United States if necessary. That what they've done is because of immigration flows and people going out there and Hezbollah being able to, establish those networks, use the terror crime nexus, as you talk about, the crime to fund terror. Iran has said, hey, this also helps us out, and we can exploit, our relationship with Hezbollah to set the conditions, for other type of activities, operations if necessary. Would that be accurate?
Yes, Dave. From my opinion is that would be very accurate. Yes.
Now, so I guess my next question is, what do you recommend is done by that, both from the countries in the tri-border region and also partners and allies in confronting this, which is not just, it sounds like it's not just a tri-border issue, it's a global issue in countering Iran and Hezbollah.
Yes, and Dave, and that's what I have been working on since my PhD thesis, is how do we counter that? How do we prevent anything from happening? How do we, well, the first thing is to understand the role of Hezbollah in South America. Well, if you're going to make a geographic cut, South America, to understand and how the Hezbollah cells and operatives in South America, they do relate with their counterparts elsewhere within the US, in Africa, in Europe, in Australia, for instance, in the Middle East. So we have to understand it from, an umbrella of Hezbollah as a whole. So now looking at the way we used to counter these threats, we do it in silos. Every country deals with their own. So Brazil has a stance against terrorism and has its threats and its strategic objectives for countering transnational crime and everything. There, as every other country in South America, as the US has its own and everything. What I see is that even now there is seen since 9/11, our law enforcement agencies and military, they have been partnering and cooperating more often. So cooperating and information sharing has been way better than it was pre 9/11. But even though we cooperate, we share information, but that doesn't mean we know each other institutional wise. And why do I say that? Because I think one of the pillars of good cooperation, being intrastate or interstate, is that we have to know the partner we are cooperating with. And what is this knowing each other? Is know the partner's business, core objectives, what the partner needs, and vice versa. Because sometimes I can share an information with a partner that is important for me, but not important for the partner, for its context. And that is not helpful, because we have to share what the other one deems important for what it needs, and vice versa. And when we start to know each other, it's like a relationship or a friendship. When you know better, the better we know our friend or our partner, the better we're able to relate with the other, and the better we have to understand, and we better understand their answers and questions and also issues and everything. So cooperation, a lot of it's lost in translation, so to speak. So what I think it's one of the first things, we have to know each other. Knowing each other means that what might be a threat for Brazil, for Argentina, for Paraguay, might not be a threat for the US or the European Union, for instance. But there is a general threat that it's a common denominator with all of us, is that, for instance, all of these countries want to diminish the influence of malicious actors. We want to lower their influence within our countries, if not to eliminate their influence. So what's the malicious influence of Hezbollah in our country? Once they deal, because I don't see Hezbollah planning any attacks in Brazil, for instance, because they make a lot of money in here. So once they make money out of legal and illegal businesses, they are operating in a comfort zone. So this is a place in which they fund themselves, but they do attacks elsewhere. So if they're funding themselves here, and this represents a threat. Why? Because if they're funding through, for instance, drug trafficking, cocaine trafficking, they also foster violence because there is a lot of infight between traffickers. They foster corruption, and they foster instability through drug trafficking. So that does not necessarily mean terrorism, because, and then I have to make a deviation here, just talk about a subject that people generally, and it's a way to approach theoretically and in the doctrine. People generally look at terrorism as the attack. So what the media broadcasts are the spectacular attacks. But few people know or acknowledge that in order that attack happens, there is a range of actions they have to be taken to support that attack. And also a range of actions after the attack. So in order to get the attack successfully conducted, you have to first recruit people, radicalize, to work the logistics, to finance, to train people, and then the attack. And after the attack, if it's not a suicidal attack, you have to make evasion routes for the perpetrators. And some groups, they publicize their attacks because they want to be all over the internet and the media and everything. So that's why most counter-terror legislations throughout the world, they deem terrorism, this whole cycle, it's called the terrorist activity cycle. So this whole cycle is considered to be terrorism facilitation, or the terrorist attack itself. So if you see the terrorism under this umbrella, if they are financing through drug trafficking in the tri-border area, this is also terrorism. So we have a common denominator to cooperate among other countries, the countries that are feared to be attacked, and the countries that are being used to facilitate for the terror attack. So this is what is missing, as far as in my opinion, in international cooperation. Because for them, for these terrorist organizations, they do cooperate with criminals in a way that they know, look, our objectives are different, but we have a common denominator. You criminal, you want to make money, you're looking for profit. My thing is ideological, but I need money in order to get my ideological aims. And then if we partner and you see a profit in this partnership, we will both integrate and do a good job together. And I think that should be the aim of international cooperation, to find a common denominator after knowing each other, find a common denominator, and then coordinate and cooperate in a way to counter the threat from a global scale, because it does not help if we just counter the threat in the tri-border area, and then these guys, they just spill over to another area in which they'll do the same, and in this kind of stuff. So we have to do it in a way that it's simultaneously conducted, and conducted in a way that we know that they're shifting, they're sending drugs from here to Africa through Europe, and the profits are put in a bank somewhere, and then they would launder their money in the US or Canada or European Union. So it has to be it's like a concert of approach. You have to look at more broadly, more in a multi-dimensional way. We just can't counter these actors locally only.
I wanted to shift a little bit, but kind of keep that same theme. You're mentioning of understanding the partners, of understanding, their kind of interest, understand the history that shaped them, why they perceive something the way they do. Words like empathy start to pop up in my mind and stuff like that. One of my criticisms of, the U.S. military, to be honest, and the development system is we tend to focus a lot on making individuals what I call technicians, very capable of doing their job from like a process standpoint. So if you're, I'll take me for example, I was an artillery officer. I got the very best training on how to call for fire, how to, ensure that the round was safe. Manual gunnery is what we called it. But really, I think where we've been lacking is this nurturing of the intellect to get to understanding, to get to empathy, to not just be able to employ a system or do a job, but understand the environment that you're entering and also the consequences of your actions in those environments. I mention that because you have a very impressive and unique background as both a scholar and a practitioner. And I'm curious, number one, what led you towards your scholarly endeavors?
Mhm.
And how have those scholarly endeavors affected the way or influenced the way that you practice your life as a practitioner?
Mhm. Right, Dave. Well, that's a very interesting point that you have raised, because I deeply believe that when we combine the strengths of the practitioners with the academia, we can boost a lot our response in our jobs, in what we do, and can boost a lot the research done by academia. And you are right. I would say the same parallel in law enforcement, at least from my experience. As you go through law enforcement training, right after you have your first posting, right? It's not as usually as in Brazil, for instance, the federal or police training is not as very lengthy. It's 4.5 to 5 months training before you get promoted for a first posting. But it's like let's say it's a technician's training. It's a technical training. It's like a factory to make civilians into law enforcement officers, into federal agents. And what happens is that there's a transformation. Of course, you have people that come from all types of backgrounds, experiences in college, degrees, and they end up in a law enforcement academy in which they are taught how to to counter crime, how to shoot pistol rifles and everything, how to conduct a search warrant on an arrest warrant, and many other things that will prepare you to be a special agent on the field, a field agent a few months later. Well, that means you're ready for your technical work. But what happens with academia, and going back to my background, the first time I saw this practitioner's side connecting with academia was before I became a federal agent. I used to be a lawyer, a tax lawyer for I have a law degree, so that was my first degree, for a international company, international consulting company that I worked for 4 years. And in this international company called KPMG International, I have first gotten in touch with how did they see that they would encourage its trainees and its employees to pursue academic degrees in order to bring the experiences, the theories into the practitioner's field, in order to advance and to refine and better our consultancy jobs and everything. So when I left the consulting company and joined the federal police 21 years ago, I had this thing in mind, but I was posted deep in the jungle in the Amazon for a period of time. And then I moved to other borders. And so I had this experience all across Brazil within the federal police. And I realized that, since I was very well trained for the technical work I needed to do, but I couldn't see the bigger picture. And I give you an example. When I was in the Amazon 20-something years ago, and I was posted in the border with Colombia and Peru, and I was working mainly with the operations to counter the FARC guerrilla influence in Brazil and transnational cocaine trafficking, mostly conducted by FARC. So FARC used to Brazil as a transit country to ship their cocaine to the US and to Europe. And they used a lot of illegal airstrips. They used the river systems to ship the cocaine. They would infiltrate fighters in our local communities alongside the rivers near the border areas. So our job was to prevent them to do that and to break their logistics. And at that time, I was trained as a jungle expert, and this kind of training that prepare you to operate in that environment. So I was very good at operating in the jungle with a rifle and patrolling and doing a lot of stuff, search and doing police job. But I did not understand the bigger picture. why FARC was there, why Brazil was so important for them. If not Brazil, what would they resort to? What do they need in order to ship their cocaine to the US and Europe and Africa and beyond? And what are their connections beyond what we were investigating? And I started to read literature about FARC and their political goals and their criminal businesses in cocaine trafficking. And I came across a lot of very, very good reading by authors, not only in Latin America, but also in the US authors and European ones. And those authors gave me a much broader view on the problem. And then I realized, look, these guys are in the academia doing a lot of research, and they have access to ground information, to what we call in intelligence, the A1 information, the information straight from the source. And they were academics, and they knew much better than I did about what was happening strategically. In the tactical level, nobody could know better than us, because we were there in the field, doing that activity day in, day out. But they knew whatever they needed from the tactical level, but they knew a lot of the strategic, so they could link the whole thing up with the methodology. And so I realized that my bosses were also reading those articles in order to come up with a broader strategy to counter FARC outside the tactical element in the border areas within the Amazon, because I had the chance to operate all across the Amazon and with the neighboring countries in different circumstances. So coming back from the Amazon, also, I went to another border area with Bolivia and Paraguay. I served for a few years there, and then Brasilia. And then I decided to pursue an academic career in order to be able to work on that methodology field, get to know more people that were researching outside my environment, because my environment consisted of special agents. So we had a way of thinking that it's like in the military. We are involved we are in our comfort zone, because we all think pretty much the same and we have the same objectives. Sorry, we pretty much know what to do, and within the scope of our duty and everything. And then I was benefited, and I thank a lot to the Federal Police for this opportunity. That Federal Police had understood back then, like 12 years ago, that would be interested to send some agents to study in civilian universities to pursue master's and PhD degrees and doctorate degrees. And they wanted us to study not in law enforcement universities, not in military universities, but in civilian universities, to be able to be in a completely different environment that at some point could be either even hostile to us, because it was so different, with different policies, different way of seeing public security, but would enable us to see our job from different lenses. So I was glad to be in the first batch of special agents that were going through a selection process, was selected to take my master's in international relations in this in a very highly ranked private university in Brazil, and I did it. And I remember, and the Federal Police also funded my studies, fully funded my studies and my research, not only in a master's but later in my PhD. And when we started, we were about 15 agents in different universities, different teams. I was in international relations, other people were in all different sorts of studies. And I remember one thing that it came to my mind as well. I couldn't see the bigger picture of this strategy first, but in my first week in the university, when we introduce each other to the professors, and I said that I was a special agent with the Brazilian Federal Police. And after class, we were about 12, 15 students. Some of them came to me, they were between their mid-20s, mid-30s, and said, wow, it's the first time I see in person a federal agent, because I always see you guys in the news, in movies, and in everything, in the media, doing big investigations, big operations, and everything. But we don't see you guys. For us, you're like ghosts. And for the first time, I seen flesh, one special agent in front of me. And that for me was interesting, because, and they say, we have a lot of questions. And I told them, well, we have 2 years, you can answer all the questions you have, and we can exchange a lot. So it was an environment that both benefited. In my case, my institution for having me there, searching with people with different mindsets and bringing to the institution, and myself bringing them our institution so they would know better about the federal police, and therefore they would have more empathy towards my institution, because they saw, we can talk to him and we can discuss freely within the academic umbrella everything we want. So bringing also, of course, so that when I did my research there, funded by the federal police, I did on a subject that was in the strategic interest of the federal police. And it was my personal interest also. And the university also profits from that, because it's a practitioner bringing its practitioner's view to a mostly theoretical environment. So I could test their theories, and they could use some of our practitioners' experiences to advance their theories. So it's something that benefits everybody, both sides, the academia and the practitioners. So this program in the federal police, it has grown. Now we are hundreds of federal agents that are simultaneously pursuing their PhDs or masters, not only in Brazil, but now overseas as well. And as we come back to our institutions, in my case, the federal police, I brought all this research that I did in academics with all the methodology, all the protocols and everything. And we are able to start changing doctrine, local doctrine. We are able to change how we see some issues. And our leadership allows us to maneuver, to act as like in an advisory role about what could be done out of this academic experience. And as we are putting there, like you say in your words, we are nurtured into something different from a technical training. There's a lot of pressure in the academic world for you to become a critical thinker. So I would say that I would see public security, public safety from different eyes, from a different view, not as a special agent with the federal police, but as an academic surrounded by students that in that case were many years younger than me, with different perspectives, with different experiences, sharing with me thoughts that I have been able to reach those thoughts while only in my professional environment. So the academia brought me this, and also brought me another way of judge things that I would see from the inside of a law enforcement institution. So it changed the way that my judgment would go. So I would judge things in a more, I'll say it this way. I had a way of judging things from my law enforcement perspective. So I could judge things from a civil society perspective, combined with law enforcement. So that gives more legitimacy to what you say, what you speak. So when you're speaking with the academics throughout the years, I learned the language. I learned the way that I should address things that I could bring. If I brought straight from the law enforcement to the academia, they would not be understood. So I had to kind of translate that into their language, into their reality, into their cultural background, so they could see the law enforcement in a way that, oh, okay, it's not that they write on the papers. I said, no, it's deeper than that. But I could bridge this thing to them. So academia, for me, it was a way for me to, I went back 20 years when I was first in the Amazon. So that's why in my research, I kept on writing, publishing about FARC, because it was my first touch with an international threat to my country, transnational threat to my country. And I understood also that terrorist organizations would be a threat. And it's a kind of a theme that I love and that I've been working on in my practitioner side and the academic side. And also the good thing about being a practitioner and an academic is that we bring the best of both worlds, because we have a foot in each. So we can benefit from making all these interactions whenever needed, whenever necessary, to advance our theories, all the aspects that deal with how we're going to act on the field, how we're going to conduct strategic thinking within our institutions. So for me, it was a very, I was looking back because, it's taking being a practitioner and studying at the same time. It's kind of hard because, my family, had to put up with this, studying through the night, all the weekends, no holidays, this kind of stuff. But it paid off, and it was very much worth it. I looking back, I'll do the whole thing again, and that's why I keep encouraging my colleagues in the federal police to pursue a civilian education to the master's and a postgraduate level, because the personal benefits and the professional benefits are invaluable.
Now, I think it's fascinating, the compounding value that you describe. I often think, as someone who spent nearly the last, I guess, 7 years focused on educating the practitioner, and before that was a practitioner himself, I always looked at education as what it does to the individual and then the institution, and it enables it. But the way you highlight that, hey, it's not just about the individual in the security institution, but it's also about the awareness of citizens and society and their interaction at these universities with those practitioners. It's about the value to the universities, about getting that perspective that can enable education. One of the things not all the time, but often there's this kind of divide between academia and the practitioners. Academia, or practitioners, look at academia as the ivory tower that is just inaccessible. The language is difficult. They don't understand the kind of the concepts of theory and stuff like that. But then you look at academia as, we don't want to get that close to the state, because we don't agree with some of their policies and stuff like that. I always thought that was kind of short-sighted, from the perspective of, academia, who, to your point, have a deeper understanding, oftentimes on these topics, can influence state policy, can influence the way the behavior of representatives of the state, of practitioners, by educating them, by making them more thoughtful. And on the other hand, on the theory side, for the practitioners, I always, to me, we operate with theory every day as practitioners. When we take an action, when we decide to do something, we have a theory that if I do this, a better condition will be the outcome. We just don't put it in the same theory language that academics do, right? Or practitioners don't put in the same theory language that academics do, but it's theory. The logic is theory. And so I find it fascinating and also encouraging that you found it to be so rewarding in the value, not just for yourself, but of society and of institutions, from you pursuing education. And so I think it's fantastic.
And Dave, one of you came to the, I think it's very something for me. It was one of the main findings in this that you just said is that first of all, the practitioners, they see the academia from a distance as this ivory tower and the whole thing. And I could say the reverse thing is that, okay, we don't want to get close to the state because it's difficult to deal with them. And when we actually do the bridge, my main finding was, well, we are not that much apart, but there are narratives that keep us apart. And so their narratives should not be considered because they're not the real world. And by the way, a lot of people in the practitioner side, they would say, okay, the academics are, as they are distant from reality, they produce things that are not reality. And that's not the way I see it, because sometimes, because of the use of language, the way that they use it, and the methodology, it might become tricky or hard to understand for practitioners, because as practitioners, the word says practitioner, so it's practical. We are more practical in doing things, more pragmatic. But the academics, well, That's their business, to think out of the box, to connect ideas, to try different things. So once we bridge with them and we learn that, well, it's healthy, professionally healthy to challenge your beliefs, because we will not find peers over there that them all think the way we do. And I was challenged many times by colleagues that were 10 years younger than me or 15 about things that I did not have an answer for them, because they challenged me in a way that I had never been challenged before. And this changes our perspective, because, well, I have to find an answer for that, because whatever he asked or he or she asked me makes a total sense. But I have never asked myself that question, and none of my peers in the police force. So the academia, they just instigate you to look for answers. They instigate you to think outside your comfort zone. And this is what a lot of practitioners call the ivory tower. But it's not an ivory tower. It's just a place in which you have a free flow of thinking, and whatever you say, you will have to make your point. If you do not make with the method, with a good ground and everything, you're gonna be destroyed. And that tells us a lot, right? That teaches us a lesson, because quite a few times there I voiced something that I didn't have enough substance, and they just finished me. And I realized, well, I have to elaborate that better. But to elaborate that better, I have to understand how they see it. And that comes to something we talked in the beginning of our talk, which is knowing each other. So also to cooperate with academia in a profitable way, we have to know each other. They should be interested in knowing me, and I should be interested in learning about them. So when we learn each other, we know each other, things flow much easier. And then we can bring the academia closer to our, like advisory boards, and to be closer to us, in order to also help build public policy. And that's something, Dave, that I get a lot inspired by what you do in the US, because you have spearheaded this decades ago, even at the World War II. And I remember that the first doctrine on intelligence came from your most prestigious universities in the US and in the UK. And whenever intelligence was, analysis and collection and dissemination were put together as a theory, as a protocol, as a doctrine that is still used by all the intelligence agencies in the world, is something that was crafted in the 40s. And it came up by you guys doing this, coming to the university and bringing their, picking on their brains in order to establish an intelligence gathering, and I keep telling, when I teach intelligence to civilians, I keep telling them, well, intelligence, there is no, magic around this thing. There's no crystal ball. There's nothing. Intelligence is nothing but academic methodology put in practice. It's no different writing an intelligence report than writing an academic article. The procedure is the same. You have to go through the same thing, collection techniques, into analysis techniques. That is academic methodology. So, but you guys came up with this nearly 80 plus years ago. So, and that was something that inspired others to do so. And the way that you are very close to think tanks, and think tanks also, from my view, and I can see it like some that are very known, that have been helping the U.S. government in driving its public policy, its international policy and domestic and everything. So in Brazil, we have been also going into this direction for a few, maybe 20 years now. More think tanks and universities being part of government partnerships in order to advance public policy in all fields. And I'm talking beyond security, beyond national security, but economic, health, education, everything. So I think it's, everyone, it's a win-win situation when we bridge academia with the practitioners.
You mentioned something early on in that statement that I really like, and I think shows the difference in the cultures between academia and practitioners, but where academia can provide value and where you were talking about being challenged in the classroom on your ideas. I think for many good reasons, we have this deference to leadership. We have this deference to rank. We have this deference to position within national security institutions, the military particularly. Academia is not like that, as you know. It's about the contestation of ideas. It's the idea you bring to the table, the knowledge, the rigor of research. And I think many times I would argue that our failures, in policy, our failures in military operations, a lot of times has been overly deference to positions and rank, and not enough, not enough academic flavor or academic perspective in regards to, no, it's contestation of ideas, the rigor of analysis and understanding. And while I don't think we'll ever get away from that deference, I think we can weaken it to a point to where we can still maintain it, to have good order and discipline, and because it's necessary. But we also, can weaken it to the point to where we understand that not all that leaders aren't all knowing, because no one is. And it is okay to challenge in a respectful way. And we can also appreciate that maybe someone of a junior rank on a given topic has more knowledge and understanding than that senior person. And that senior person is humble enough to be able to accept that. And I'll be honest, I think a lot of our failures in the US military has been the inability to have that humility with our senior leaders.
Yes, Dave, I agree entirely with you. We have this thing of deference to rank, but also we need structure, and because our organizations are based on hierarchy, so it's needed. We can't just get away from that. But at the same time, if the senior leaders approach the junior leaders who have, are inventive, they have been sent to do an academic degree, a higher academic degree, to bring to the institution something, the individual also has to learn to be humble, how to present her ideas, how to discuss them, because that's one thing that I also have learned, that while it doesn't mean that you go outside for a few years, 7-10 years, to study something and you come back, you have learned, you have experienced something different, but that does not mean that you are the one that knows everything about that. You might know from that perspective, but your senior leadership, they have other things to add on it. So it's a combination of what you have learned that you can offer to advise the senior leadership to craft something more strategic. So you have to be humble, as you should be. But I think this is not, you say that is a problem that you have faced in the US in the realm of special operations, but I think it's a human thing, right? We face this everywhere. So one thing that I was I have learned also, because in the academic, like in any place, we see a lot of people that they craft themselves out of this their specific knowledge that they have amassed through many years of study, and some of them, they think they are the ivory tower of the whole thing, and that doesn't help, because these people become more isolated, because they are unreachable, so their ideas do not circulate and they become outdated. So when you go back to your, in my case, I never actually left the force. I was studying, and simultaneously pursuing I was working, pursuing my degrees, and so I had this foot in reality. So I had, I'm coming back with a lot of knowledge that I have learned, experiences and everything. Now I have to make it, but it can't be. We just can't expect that, out of the blue, overnight things will change, because institutions like military and law enforcement, in my view, institutions that they have this, they are hard to change. We do not change them overnight. It takes like a generation for big changes actually happening. So we have to be patient and contribute to what we can do, looking in a long term, how what we have learned can be put in a long-term perspective. So you go step by step. In my case, for instance, when I were studying the crime terror nexus and bringing that whole thing back to my institution, one thing that I realized is that, okay, I have to go step by step, because to build the argument in order to become something that is acceptable, the leadership, that, okay, it does exist, it's a threat to our country, how to deal with this, knowing that public policy, laws and regulations will not change overnight. So we build on it in order to reach what we believe, and well, the leadership assessing the information that I got, the knowledge will believe it's doable. So that's part of it. And that's how we should see it, because I see some people that get frustrated after getting a higher degree, that, okay, I can't actually apply in our day-to-day everything that I have learned. But well, in my opinion, everybody can, but you have to do it, have to, to respect the flow of things within the government reality, because we know that things move slower than the private company, for instance. When I moved from a private company to the government, I could see that instantly. Things at a private company, most of them, they do happen overnight, especially if we are in a very competitive environment, in which it was the one that I came from. But when you are a police force or a military, that you have no actual competitors within our boundaries, though you're more resistant to change. But that happens once you can put your point across and the leadership finds out, okay, that makes sense, but I have to structure how to implement this. So this is the process. It's the same as the learning process. We do not become a PhD grad or a doctor overnight. We have to study there for 5 years. You can't just speed and do it in 2 years, because you need all those 5 years to mature yourself within, and it's the same, in another scale with also the government. So I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. Go.
No, you bring two things up that I think is very important. Number one, understand the environment you're working within, right? Understand, when you're working in government, how government operates. And although you might get frustration, that's the environment that you're trying to influence. So you have to understand and appreciate the nature of that environment. And I think the most important thing, and this is what I took away from education, was I actually left there realizing how ignorant I remained.
Mm-hmm.
And how that was important, that I could not do it alone, that I had to work collectively, because there were people out there who understood a piece of the puzzle that I didn't, and were making connections that I didn't know. And as a practitioner, that was very important. And so it gave this sense of humility, of, an acceptance of my own ignorance, but the curiosity and drive to learn from others. And to me, that is one of the biggest kind of values of education, is that humbling effect. And then it kind of pushes you towards more teamwork and collaboration that you highlighted early on, if you want to be effective.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dave, I think that's absolutely needed, and that's an absolute important point, to be humble, to understand that alone we can't do much, and collectively, and be able to learn from everyone. The same that I remember from my academic, my beginning of my master's, in which I met students in their mid-20s that they had never had a work before. They were just full-time students, but they had, even though they had no practical experience, some of them would ask some questions and put some points that I said, look, well, I have to learn with him or her, because this is something I have never thought of, or never crossed my mind. And then we start to develop. And sometimes it looked even naive the way that they put it, but they put it in a way that is naive, but I didn't have not even an answer, but I wouldn't be able to follow the conversation. I said, okay, I have to learn something. And the same with my law enforcement colleagues. The more, those experiences that were acted in a different environment, those who have never been in touch with academia whatsoever, and they hate it, but they had a lot to teach me, and my leaders and my subordinates. So we are always learning, and I'm generally an optimistic person. So when I learned these things and came back and I realized, well, the more we study, the less we know, right? Just like you say. So I have to keep on studying, and I have to keep on. And I look at my organization and I see, wow, the organization wants me to pursue that because, 12 years back when they started this program, they envisioned something in the long term. They did not envision that they would send out people to study, they would come back and magic would happen and the whole federal police would change overnight. I believe that was not what they envisioned. And nowadays I see that they were looking at the future. So they know it's a long-term perspective. So, but they were seeding this through these special agents in order to plant the seed, to produce, and then the thing would expand in order to be able to have like a core of people that would be able to make some big changes for the future. And this core of people would be scattered all around Brazil to see all our environmental, operational theaters, to understand complexities, management, everything. So it's like building a pyramid. So we are, you're just starting. So that's it. We have to have this resilience and patience and, humility to see that it's a long run. And we are just a brick in this long run. And we have to make sure that our brick is solid, well placed, and that we will be able to build on it.
Hey, Christian, thank you. This has been fantastic. I could go on all day with a discussion with you on this. And, unbeknownst to the audience, we did have a discussion for about an hour before we even came here.
You are right.
Such a rich topics. But thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining ThinkJSOU. Hope to continue this discussion as we move forward.
Dave, thank you a lot for hosting me. I was very happy to be here. For me, I didn't even see the time passing. Like you say, we talked for about an hour before this. And I'd like to thank also ThinkJSOU for this opportunity. It's great being here with you, and I hope we have more opportunities to discuss, issues like this in other, again, in sometime in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you, ThinkJSOU, for this.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Have a great day.
Have a great day, you too. Thank you, Dave.